Welcome back everybody. Today I'm making a new video tutorial about creating a base mesh for a female character. I'm going to be making kind of a video series covering a lot of different things, from female base mesh to clothing, hair creation, rigging, and a lot of different stuff. Apologies for the lack of content being released. I have been dealing with a lot of college stuff. I'm in my last year of software engineering. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. When we're creating a base mesh, you always want to jot out the important aspects before you start adding in any detail. As you can see here, I'm just doing the most rudimentary basic stuff with just mapping out the body shape. And when you're doing these basic things at the beginning, you don't really need to follow anything regarding male and female. We're literally just adding in the skeletal part of the mesh, which is why you don't really need to sweat the details whether male or female. Just adding in the basic silhouette of the rib cage, the shoulders, the arms, the skull, neck, stuff like that. We're not even focusing on the muscular tissue and the shape of the physical body itself, just mapping stuff out. It's literally similar to how you would see someone drawing a sketch. If you've ever seen someone draw a sketch, or actually even just sculpting in real life, like woodworking, if you see someone trying to sculpt someone with clay or just sketching, you will see that the first thing they always do is just starting out with the most basic shapes, and then they will slowly start to move into the muscle, and then they will start adding in the finer details and the facial features. As you can see here, I'm still working the basic shape of the body, not focusing on anything regarding the final shape or the muscles or anything like that. I'm just going with the bone structure and just stretching things out first before trying to sweat any details in general. It's important to note, if you're trying to create a character that is clothed or doesn't have modular clothes on them, you likely wouldn't need to sculpt the entire base model. What I'm trying to say is 99% of the time your character is going to be wearing shoes, for example, which means that the legs will be covered, which also means that your model will most likely not even have legs beneath the shoes. And so in that sense, you wouldn't even need to ever even sculpt the feet of your character. So when you're creating a character, it's important to note if there are parts that will not be visible, you should just not even sculpt it in to save time and effort. Especially if your character isn't gonna have a modular clothing system. If your game doesn't have equipment, or if your character isn't ever gonna have their feet be shown, then you might as well never sculpt it from the beginning. Same thing if your character is always going to be clothed. If your character is never going to be showing skin, then you can just take the easy way out and not add in detail. Over here, I'm working on the shoulders and the biceps and how they attach to the pecs and the breast muscles, the shoulder blades and the lats, so on and so forth. This is one of the most important parts of the body, because the shoulders and by proxy the arms are one of, if not the most active part of the mesh, and so you kind of want it to look appropriate, because the upper body and the torso in general, as well as the arms, are the most viewed part of the mesh, and so you definitely want to make sure that it doesn't look weird or out of place or anything like that. After finishing the biceps, I'm moving over to the forearm and as you can see I'm still exaggerating the muscles, but I'm just doing it to get an idea of how everything is supposed to look like. Later on I'm going to reduce all of that down and make it look better. Then I'm finishing the back muscles, the lower back, and how they connect to the obliques in front, refining the arms, the forearms, the hand, fixing the head. It's very recommended to just zoom out every once in a while, because this is something that I do frequently, which is you're hyper focusing on one part of the mesh of the body and you're working on it, perfecting it, and it looks really good as you're looking at it. But then the moment you're done with it, after like an hour of sculpting, you zoom out and you realize it's way too small, or it's way too big, or it's pointing in the completely wrong direction, or something like that, and suddenly hours of your work just went down the drain, because now you need to fix it, and by fixing it you kind of ruin it, and it's just an unfortunate thing to do. So make it a habit when you're working on something, a part of your mesh, make sure to always just zoom out every couple of minutes to make sure that everything is still in order. If you're working on a hand, for example, just zoom out every once in a while to make sure that the hand size is appropriate to the forearms and the body in general. Make sure that the fingers are pointing in the right direction, that the hand isn't twisted or anything like that, because trust me, I'm speaking from experience, you do not want to be hyper focused on something for hours only to zoom out and realize that everything is just crooked and you need to start over from the very beginning again. If you're having a character that is going to have a modular equipment system, meaning that you can equip different kinds of clothes or even take off your clothes entirely, then you're going to need to sculpt in every detail possible, because maybe an outfit is going to show some part of the skin and another outfit is gonna show a different part of the skin, and in that sense then yeah, you kinda need to add in as much detail as possible for every scenario and every situation. Over here, after I have kind of put in the basic silhouette of the body, I'm starting to add in the general muscle shape. You should almost never work without reference. Now this might not be showing right now, but I'm actually using the program called PureRef, which is an incredible product, by the way. I recommend you use it. Anyone that's interested in any 3D work or any artistry in general should use that program. It is an absolute godsend. But yeah, I am using that program. It's just on a second monitor because I don't want to crowd space. But yeah, anyone that's just starting out should always be using a reference, because obviously a lot of us didn't go to medical school, and so we don't really know the muscle orientations, how the muscles connect with each other, how the tissues interact, overlap and stuff like that. We don't really know most of that stuff, and you can't really guess it. You need to actually be looking at references of the individual muscles and how they connect with each other. Maybe after years of working and projects, you can get used to it and you can remember stuff like that, and you can learn it, and you might not need references to actually create the base model of your character. But definitely early on it is a must-have. You definitely need that kind of thing. And as you can see, slowly as I'm adding in the muscle definitions and everything, I am modifying the body to look more realistic, and I'm kind of just breaking down the body, adding in detail, breaking it down, adding in more detail, and slowly but surely I'm reshaping it into a proper body. And this is kind of how I like to work. Some people like to work with individual different meshes, like some people like to have a mesh for the torso, and another mesh for the arms, and another mesh for the head. They're just working with them being overlapped over each other, and this is definitely a viable method. I've seen it work tremendously well, and I've seen it be very efficient, and this is just personal preference. I like my mesh to be completely connected. I do not like it being separated. It feels disorienting, it feels weird. I've tried it before, I didn't feel comfortable, so I'm just doing it in this manner. Now, when I'm just starting out with sculpting the mesh early on, I like to exaggerate the muscles. You don't really see this kind of muscle definition on normal women. But as I'm starting out with just creating the early image of the female or any character in general, male or female, I tend to exaggerate the muscles in the beginning to help give me a sense of scale for the body and how everything's supposed to be placed. And then as I move into progressing my model, I end up erasing and reducing most of that harsh muscle definition that I'm adding in. Starting to work a little bit on the legs of the model, and similar to what I did up top, I'm focusing on exaggerating the muscles structure to get a sense of scale, of how everything is supposed to look. Then after figuring most of these things out, I'm going to obviously smooth things out and not make it look as exaggerated as it is, and making sure that the proportions are appropriately maintained from the butt to the thighs and the hips, fixing most of the proportions up. I noticed that the shoulders are way too wide as well as the arms, so I start working again on the upper body before continuing on the lower body. This is kind of frustrating part of working on a full human body, is the fact that in the beginning you're just fixing something, and then an hour later, after you're working on a completely different part, you realize that you're not really done. You're just always switching from one part to another. Now I'm starting to work on the hand of the model, and one of the recommended things to do when you're working on limbs in specific is secluding that part of the mesh and hiding the remaining part, because one of the most annoying things about working with limbs is when you're panning the camera, a lot of the time the camera is just going to get covered by the body of the mesh, and that can get incredibly annoying really fast. So just hold Control Shift and drag on the hands of the character, and you're going to notice that the entire body has been hidden away while only the hands remain, and now you can freely sculpt the hand without anything getting in the way of your mesh. Now again, just simply having reference images of female hands on the side and just slowly but surely sculpting it out, making sure you keep the proper tissue connections maintained and the skeletal parts of the hands maintained, and just slowly but surely working it out. It's somewhat annoying that you can't really use symmetry and mirroring on the hand itself, because all 5 fingers are different and you don't want to just make one finger and then duplicate it 4 times. But yeah, making the hands is one of the more tedious aspects of creating a mesh, which is why if you're not feeling comfortable or if you're not satisfied with how you're doing hands, you can just opt to make your character wear gloves, and obviously with gloves there are 10 times less detail, so you can just make a basic shape of a hand and just keep it at that. And when you're texturing your character, just make make it seem as if they're wearing a glove, if you do not want to bother adding in the details and whatnot. And obviously there are many characters who do not show their hands, you know, like maybe you're wearing gloves, you're wearing armor, you're wearing something that covers your hand, and it's a pretty easy way to reduce the amount of work that you have to do. As you can see, the way that I'm making fingers is not really the best way possible. I haven't really created base meshes in a decently long while, so I'm kind of rusty when it comes to this kind of stuff. The legs are thankfully slightly less annoying than the hands, but they're still generally very time consuming. Getting the basic shape of the feet, the muscular structure. Now as you can see, I'm pretty much finished with the leg part of this mesh, and again, if I wasn't going to be selling this model later on, I wouldn't have bothered making the legs at all, since they're most definitely not gonna be shown. Lastly, I'm going to start focusing on the head of the mesh. This is the last thing that I'm focusing on. I'm gonna be starting off with the mouth of the mesh and adding in the general features of the head, like the nose, the eye cavity, stuff like that. And I'm gonna be starting off with the easiest part of the head, which is the mouth. It's the easiest part in my opinion, and you just want to start making two bumps and using the dam standard to cut in between them, as you can see here, making proper use of the inflate brush to make the lips seem more plump, giving the mouth the proper shape, giving more detail to the nose, the chin. And now I'm going to start working on the ears. And the ear, as you can see in the references that I showed previously, it's supposed to start from where the jawline ends pretty much, and it is supposed to be at generally the same height as the eye socket, as you can see. And lastly, I'm going to be focusing on the eye. And the eye, a general rule of thumb, and this is something that you would actually be taught if you were learning a pen or a pencil, and that is the head is supposed to be 6 eyes wide, which is why, as you can see here, I'm making 6 spheres and then I'm combining them together, and I need to fit all of these 6 eyes inside of the widest part of the head. When you do that, a single ball from the 6 is the size of the actual eyeball that you need to keep in mind. So as you can see, after I get the size as perfect as I can, I'm going to polygroup them to get each ball separately, and then I'm going to separate them by clicking Ctrl Shift and tapping one of them. After I separate one eye from the remaining 5, I go into Geometry, Modify Topology, and Delete Hidden. Now your eye is alone, you don't have the remaining 5 eyes, but as you can see, the pivot might be completely off center. So what you do is you tap on the lock symbol, lock, and make sure to unlock it. Then you can move the pivot as you see fit. and you don't need to have it perfectly in the center, but just get it as close as possible. Then you tap on the lock symbol again, and when it's locked, now you can control the eyeball again with the move controls and the gizmo. Now after you've placed the eye generally in the proper space, you're going to start covering it with the eyelids in this manner, as you can see, and start shaping the eyelids in this manner. You want to try to make sure that both corners of the eyes are generally leveled. You also need to obviously add the top crease. Humans have an upper fold when you open your eyes, as you can see up top like this. It gets folded inward, and this part of the eye in specific is somewhat fatty, so you need to sculpt it properly. After you've pretty much finished most of the crucial details, you want to just start adding in the more finer ones, the last little bit of creasing here and there, give the proper final shape, fixing the nose a little bit, reducing the upper eye since it's a little too much. Lastly, to duplicate the eye, you want to select the eye in the subtool, duplicate it, and then go down below to the modify section, and then you want to go down to the deformation section and click on mirror, which is going to place it on the opposite side. Then you go back to the subtool, select the top eye and merge it down below, and then you're going to have both eyes combined. Then you want to start creating the iris part of the eye, and to do that you're gonna want to go into solo mode to have the eyes separate. And a proper way to get the size of the iris correctly, pretty much the distance from the center of the eye to the edge of the iris is supposed to be the same distance from the edge of the iris to the edge of the eye. And the mesh is pretty much complete. I'm just fixing a little bit of parts of the face, giving it a little more realistic facial features, and that's pretty much it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was a little bit informative. If you learned anything from this video, or if you found it helpful, I hope you leave a like and subscribe, maybe comment down below. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.